that's a very good question. I'm James Shabazz. I have been a citizen of the Nation of Islam for about 62 years, since I was a child. I'm a community organizer. I have helped to organize tenants, small business caucuses like the street vendors and cab drivers. Currently, I'm working with a group of brothers by the name of Brothers Huddle, and we're organizing in public housing in Washington, D.C. The first, in my view, the first thing we have to do is to avail ourselves to the science of politics and economics. We have to learn the science. We have to begin to navigate through those two arenas, through the political arena and economic arena. Right now, I would say that grassroots black DC is totally defenseless, because grassroots black DC does not have the knowledge of the science of politics, science of economics, literacy in both fields, and the confidence to go out into the political and economic arena and make things happen for ourselves.
So why do you think that is, brother?
Well, the problem is culture. The culture, or cultivating those disciplines in our children, is not in the home. It's not in the public school system. It's not in the church. It's not something that we talk about on a day-to-day basis, because it's not a part of our culture. Right now, while we're having this interview, most of us are at home watching football. Discussion at the dinner table. I remember as a child, there was also always discussion at the dinner table. First of all, I had a father, I had a mother, and I had siblings. And there was always discussion at the dinner table. Why? Because it was a mandatory cultural practice of our house. We ate breakfast together in the morning. We ate dinner in the evening when my father came home. And on Saturday and Sunday mornings when we had breakfast, that's when the conversations would take place. Mostly they would tell us about life that they lived, and they would share with us the kind of life that they would hope that we live. And we discussed, or they discussed with us, the things that we had to do in order to create a meaningful existence for ourselves and perhaps do better than them. The problem today is, in my humble view, is that there is no dinner table in the black home anymore. Everybody eats in their own room. Everybody has a TV in their own room. Nobody eats the same things or at the same time. So, and then there's that dastardly telephone. Everybody's on the telephone. So that culture is not there. That culture has to be reinstituted somehow, so that we can discuss these things at home. You see, I remember hearing my parents discussing a second house that they owned, that they bought and owned, and was renting out to people. In those days, it was popular to rent out rooms. You see, and they would discuss the problems that they were having with that level of business, and they also discussed what they had to do to solve that problem. Now, we weren't a part of that discussion because we were young, but we heard it. We heard them discussing it. You see, so there's distractions in the black family today, and until we learn how to deal with those distractions, then we won't have space to discuss these things, because that's where whatever the solution is to stop gentrification and reverse its effects, it's going to have to come from discussions between family members in the home. And then from there, it leads to discussion in the neighborhoods with the various grassroots levels of leadership that's in the community now. What are some of those in Washington, D.C.? So we have parents teachers associations, we have student unions, we have we have homeowners block clubs, and tenant associations, if I didn't mention that. When the brothers go to the barbershop and get a haircut, that's an area for discussion. When the ladies go to the beauty salon to get their hair cut or styled, that's a format or forum that these things could be discussed. There's so many things that we have at our disposal here in D.C. We just have to be inspired to do so. And then, of course, we have to make sure that we have the right subject matter. So those of us who, now one problem that we have in D.C., now I'm going to say this as my personal opinion, because I believe it to be true. We have, in Black D.C., we have a class. We have a class separation here. We have a caste separation here, if you will. And it's been here since the end of slavery, where the teachers, the doctors, the lawyers, the business people, the members of polite society, the bourgeois element, okay, they have the same goals, dreams, aspirations as anybody else, to raise their children, to have a profession so that money could be made and to live the good life. But now that grassroots black person, which could be homeless, which could be public housing residents, which could be somebody working at McDonald's, the more humbler professions. This class has the same dream, goal, aspiration as the other class does, but they may not have the tools, you see. Now, had the plan of Dr. Dubois, W.E.B. Du Bois, worked, where the talented 10th would always maintain those conversations with the less developed classes, then the talented 10th lifting up their people over a period of 50 or 60 or 70 years would have worked, but that didn't happen. So we're going to have to figure out a way to create not only lines of communication between the two, but working relations, because if grassroots Black DC falls, so goes the other group as well. Okay.
So
brother, sometimes I get very despondent and swept up in a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Sometimes it doesn't last very long, but it happens, because as I look around at the age of 70 years old at the world that I live in and the world at large, the changes and hopes and dreams and aspirations that I had hoped for with regard to our people when I was a child, that hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened in part because I may not have done all that I could do. But I would say that it has not been enough of a collective effort on the part of the Black community that has allowed things to fall away as it has, and that is because, in my humble view, of the absence of the Black man in all levels. When my father was a builder, he was a master builder. He learned his construction skills when he came out of the military in World War II at a local school that's no longer here. It was called the Armstrong Adult Educational Center. And from there you can learn all phases of construction, all phases of car repair, automobile mechanics, whatever the skill, whatever the block building skill was in the society. In order to get a job or started a business, you could learn it at Armstrong. And my father picked up that skill there. And he became a master builder. And he was first an employee with the various large construction companies that were in the city at that time, in the 50s and 60s. And then later on, because he wanted to fulfill his dream of being self-employed, have his own company, him and his crew, they resigned from working from the big companies, and they formed their own company. Now, was the company legal? No. Did it have licenses and bonding and all of those things that's required for you to be qualified to do legal business in the city? No, because there were barriers against black men in that field, you see. But him and his crew, they would not be defeated. They went to work anyway, and they made contracts with whites and blacks or whoever to do work. They never had a flyer. They never had a business card. What they had was their reputation, you see. And whenever they built a fireplace or a sidewalk or whatever it was, you know, they did such excellent work that their fame spread by word of mouth. You see, that's how they were able to do business. And I remember him taking me throughout the city, and he would say, "Son, I built that. I worked on the crew. Me and my crew, we did that there, and we built this patio. This is what we contributed to building the city. You see, this is what I saw from men in my day. Just in that one area, we don't have that leadership today, and that has to be replaced. But in order for me to get the leadership from my father with regard to his industry, he had to be in my life as a father. You see, and he was." Yes. When I look back at my life and I see predicaments that I found myself in, I look back and said, "What's wrong? You have more education than your father. You have more tools than your father had. But yet he never found himself in that situation that you're in today. He never had his family homeless. You see, there was never any doubt that he was going to make a way in partnership with his wife, my mother. You know, there was never any doubt. Now, I found out later on that everything wasn't always peaches and cream and rosy at home, especially with money, you see. But whatever little bit of money they had, they were able to make a better day. Let me speak about segregation in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., segregation in Washington, D.C. was still in effect unofficially when I was a child. There were places downtown you couldn't go without a fight. There were stores that you couldn't go in without a struggle. But what I saw as a child was self-segregated black communities, for example. But all those familiar with Washington, D.C., I grew up in the northeast section where McKinley High School is. In fact, that's the high school that I went to, and Langley Elementary School, Emory Elementary School, you see. When we moved in that community in 1955-56, the white people were running out. White flight was in effect. They were selling their houses cheap for $3,000, $5,000, $7,000, $8,000. Houses that are now going for a $500,000, almost $1 million, right? So during that time, people were still migrating from the South to Washington, D.C. And my parents were also immigrants from my mother came from Charlotte, North Carolina, from a sharecropper plantation, and my father was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She had no education at all. My father had formal education up to the age of 8, to the 8th grade. However, throughout his life, he self-educated himself, and in my view, he's one of the greatest scholars I've ever known. All right. Now, so let's talk about the community I grew up in. It was a segregated community, but it was a self-segregated community. The whites moved out, you see? And in our community, the man who owned the liquor store and the grocery store and the dry cleaners and the barber shop and the shoe repair, all of these were black people, you see? All of these were black people. And if you, with the corner grocery store, if you didn't have money, and then Mr. Al, who owned the grocery store, he would make a way for you to pay him once a month if you were on Social Security or some kind of you're gonna have to cut that out. Some kind of Social Security or some other kind of monthly payments. Then he would make arrangements for you to buy your food and pay him once a month. We had people in the community that owned businesses that would hire young people. For example, at the age of 8, I was hired by Mr. Nathaniel Oliver, who was not only the owner of the barbershop, community barbershop, on North Capitol and Rhode Island Avenue. He hired me, paid me $8 a week to clean up the barbershop. But he also taught me how to shine shoes, and all of that money was my own. This was at the age of 8 years old. This man did that, right? And there were other businesses that hired youth. You see, and we had enough money and our parents would say, well, I'm going to hold a third of what you made for your savings, okay? Another I'm going to give to you for your spending, but don't spend it unwisely. And then the other third, I'm going to take it to help pay these bills. You see, that's so we were learning home economics from our mothers and our fathers, at that particular time. There was also a great respect for elders during that time, and that respect was enforced. For example, if you were seen misbehaving in the neighborhood, then any neighbor had the right to speak to you about your misbehavior. And then they would send you home after they would speak to you, and then they would call your parents when you got home, and then you would get another speaking to. So there was a community cohesion in the self-segregated black communities as I was growing up. You see, and everybody took care of each other. That same Mr. Oliver that I just mentioned that hired me at the age of 8, and I worked there until I was 12. Okay, this man was also the professor of barbering sciences at Armstrong Adult Educational School, which no longer exists now. And he would take young men out of jail, out of the penitentiaries, and he would teach them barbering, and he would put them to work, in his barbershop, during their period of being the step before you become an actual professional, a journeyman barber. As long as they were in that first stage, he would allow them to work in their barbershops, and then later on, they would become owners of their own shops. That kind of networking in the black community existed. And I'll even say this, even the criminal class of that day would not expose their criminal activity to the youth, nor involve them in it. You see, they would try to protect the youth from what they were doing. Today, it's just wide open. In fact, there's been a reversal. It's young men, 13, 14, 15 years old, selling crack and other illegal substances to men my age and younger. So we have a bizarro world that has been turned upside down, and we're going to have to find ways to turn it right side up so we can have moral hygiene. Because without that moral hygiene, we cannot rebuild anything. First, being a student of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I support do for self. I support if a way can be found to seek an opportunity and fund an opportunity and carry that opportunity out to its logical conclusion, to a new reality, we should do that. However, to balance the equation, because we can't always get the money or not enough money, we should get monies from corporations or from the government, as long as it doesn't tie our hands behind our back to keep us from doing our job. Let's go back to the example of Booker T. Washington. Back in the turn of the last century, in the 1900s, Booker T. Washington had no money at all, and he was working with a group of people who had no money at all because they had just recently been released from slavery. He was a former slave himself. But what he did was he took his do-for-self philosophy and plan of action to the industrialists and the philanthropists of that day. And they gave him money in order to set up a university called Tuskegee Institute, which went on to train and teach our people, not only here in this country, but in Africa and also Haiti, I believe it was. So we should try to get both, but make sure that when we get money from philanthropists, that we don't put ourselves in a bind where we can't move, we can't make the right moves. I wanna talk briefly about the best example of rebuilding that has been presented to us as a plan of action through the Nation of Islam, which is called the 9 Ministries. And that is a comprehensive plan given to us to rebuild and build the affairs of Black America from A to Z. Now, this is not going to happen by magic. We have to go into the communities. When the minister calls for 10,000 fearless, and now I'm speaking for myself, this doesn't mean that we just go and stand in ranks and make noise on a corner. You know, it means that we have to go into the communities. We have to help organize the tenants. We have to tutor, help tutor those children, and we have to tutor the adults to become literate in the areas that we're not literate in, particularly in the fields of politics and economics. For example, we are going to have to map Washington, D.C. Now, what do I mean by map? What land is available to purchase? What buildings are available to purchase? And then we have to have the legal entities in place, and we have to find money in order to buy those properties. Because once we own something, then we can develop housing, we can develop schools, we can develop businesses. And business is the engine that creates everything. But now there's also property that we need to defend. And that is and I'm not just speaking for Washington, D.C., I'm speaking for Black people who live in public housing throughout the country. The rules and regulations that govern public housing allows for the tenants and the residents who live there, organized under their own government structures called resident council governments, to own and control the buildings that they live in. You see? Now here's what happens. When a public housing project or colony has been closed down, those people are scattered to the four winds, okay? Even families are broken up, okay? They're no longer a community. They may not have had the proper moral hygiene when they were living in one community, but they had a chance as long as they could stay together. Now they don't have no chance at all because they're scattered to the four winds. Okay, so, but those residents who live in public housing, they have the opportunity to own and control that housing and the properties according to the regulations that govern HUD, Department of Housing, Urban and Development. So there's nothing to stop organized bodies of residents who live in public housing to sit down with the local government and the mayor and the city council and the federal government in the person of HUD, Department of Housing, Urban and Development, and strike up a deal, come up with a business plan so that within a 10-year period they can own and control, get the monies, establish their own business there, including a credit union. You see, now I'm talking about this real fast, but that is an opportunity that exists. And if the residents, the black residents of public housing in Washington, D.C. did that, that would help to send a message to the rest of D.C. and to the rest of the country, because there's 2.2 million people who live in public housing across the country. And I believe that what we do here can radiate to the rest of the country. I would just invite all the brothers and sisters in the nation, all of the brothers and sisters from the other advanced schools amongst us that have the training from the great ones, the great leaders who have came before us. The time now is for us to come together, you know, and get the job done. And the job is to go into the black communities and organize them for the purpose of stop gentrification and reverse its effects and create a black economic development renaissance in black America.